Hey guys, tonight we're going to step back in time, not into a grand palace or a famous battlefield, but into a simple, sturdy wagon heading west. The destination is California. The year is 1846, and the air is thick with a feeling we all know too well hope. But this is the story of the Donner Party, so let's just say if you were on this trip, your initial packing list might be a little overly open to survive the first major decision, let alone the first winter. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments below, let me know what city you're re-listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where we all are as we travel back in time together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's the spring of 1846, you're in Independence, Missouri, the great jumping-off point for the West. The air smells of damp earth livestock, and the metallic tang of a blacksmith's forge. It's a chaotic, bustling place, a whirlwind of motion and noise. This is the edge of the map, the last stop before the great unknown, and you are here filled with a nervous energy that feels like a hummingbird trapped in your chest. Your Conestoga wagon, covered with a sturdy canvas top, is your entire world now. It's a 19th century RV, but without the plumbing and with a much higher chance of getting stuck in the mud. For weeks, you've been carefully, almost ritualistically, packing it. You're supposed to bring about 1,000 pounds of food per adult to last the 4 to 6 month journey. You have the essentials: massive sacks of flour, barrels of salted pork and bacon, coffee, sugar, dried beans, and dry. The food is practical, meant for survival, but you've also bought things that, in hindsight, seem questionable. This is one of those little details that often gets lost in the grand, tragic narrative. You haven't just packed for survival, you've packed for a new life. That heavy oak dresser that's been in your family for generations, yep, it's in there taking up valuable space and adding hundreds of pounds of dead weight. Your grandmother's set of fine china, each piece carefully wrapped in quilts and linen, absolutely. A small library of leather-bound books, a writing desk, maybe even a new set of fancy clothes for your grand arrival in California. You're not just moving your body, you're moving your entire sense of what a home is. It's a deeply human and deeply impractical thing to do. You aren't alone, not by a long shot. You're part of a massive migration. This is the era of manifest destiny, the widely held belief that the United States was destined, even divinely ordained, to expand across the continent. You are part of a large, well of many snaking its way west along the Oregon Trail. For the first few hundred miles, this is a well-trodden path, the dusty, slow-motion highway. There are forts, established river crossings, and even guidebooks. There's a system, a rhythm. The system works as long as you stick to it. The people you travel with are, for the most part, strangers, but you're all bound by the same dream. You look around at the faces of your fellow travelers. There's George and Jacob Donner, the leaders for whom your group will one day be named. They're older, prosperous farmers from Illinois, bringing their large families and hired hands. Then there's James Reed, a charismatic and somewhat impulsive businessman, also from Illinois. H.S. the one with the particularly ostentatious wagon, a custom-built two-story affair that locals have nicknamed the Pioneer Palace car. It has seats with spring cushions and a built-in iron stove. It's a symbol of his ambition and perhaps his hubris. But why are you all really here on the surface? It's for a better life. The pamphlets and letters from California paint a picture of paradisal and of endless sunshine, fertile valleys where fruit practically grows itself, and a gentle climate. But historians are still debating the complex cocktail of motivations that drove each of these families to risk everything. Was it purely the economic pull of Friel, and was it about escaping debts or financial failures from the Panic of 1837, which still echoed through the economy? Was it social ambition, or perhaps the desire to escape a personal scandal back home, or was there a deeper, almost spiritual pull, a belief that you were participating in a grand, national project for you. Sitting on the driver's bench, the oxen yoked and ready, it's probably a mix of everything. A fresh start is a powerful medicine. The final checks are done. You hear the call ripple down the long line of wagons. With a crack of the whip, not a cool sound, but one of purpose, your wagon lurches forward. Its heavy wheels begin their long, slow turn towards the setting sun. You look back one last time at the town, the last real outpost of the life you knew. Ahead lies a sea of grass, a vast, green emptiness under an impossibly big sky. The journey, and your story, has begun. The first few weeks on the trail are a lesson in monotony. Your life shrinks to the rhythm of the wagon wheels, a constant, grinding turn that measures out the miles. Wake before dawn, yoke the oxen, walk beside the lumbering beasts, make camp, cook a simple meal of bacon and coffee, sleep, repeat. The great prairie is a vast, rolling ocean of green that seems to have no shore. It's beautiful, in a soul-crushingly repetitive way. The sun beats down, the dust gets into everything, your food, your clothes, your throat. At night, the campfires create small islands of light and community in the immense darkness. It's around these fires that the future begins to change. It starts with a book, a small, unassuming volume with a grand title, The Emigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. Its author is a man named Lansford W. Hastings. James Reed, ever the forward thinker, has a copy. In the evenings, as the fire crackles and the stars blaze overhead with a clarity you've never seen before, he reads passages aloud. Hastings' prose is intoxicating. He doesn't just describe California, he sells it. He paints a picture of a life so perfect it feels like a fever dream. But the most alluring part of his book, the part that makes everyone lean in a little closer, is his description of a shortcut. A new route. He calls it the Hastings Cutoff. According to the book, this cutoff begins at Fort Bridger, a trading post further down the trail. Instead of following the established route north around the Ruby Mountains and then down the Humboldt River, Hastings claims you can cut directly west across the Great Salt Lake Desert. His words promise to shave 350, maybe even 400, miles off the journey. You do the math in your head. That's weeks, not days. Weeks less of this dust. Weeks less of this dust. Weeks less of rationing food. Weeks less of worrying about your children getting sick or an axle breaking. It sounds less like a shortcut and more like a miracle. This is the central, mainstream historical fact of this part of the journey, the group's fascination with this untested route. The established trail was long and arduous, but it was known. It had reliable water sources and forage for the animals. The Hastings Cutoff was a gamble, a bet on the word of one man. And who was this Lansford Hastings? He wasn't a seasoned mountain man or an experienced guide. He was a lawyer and a real estate promoter, a man overflowing with ambition. Here's a little-known fact about him: his ambitions went far beyond writing guidebooks. Hastings dreamed of creating his own independent Republic of California, with himself, naturally, at its head. To do that, he needed American settlers, lots of them, and fast. The cutoff wasn't just about helping immigrants, it was a tool for his own grand, political project. He was, in essence, a 19th century influencer, using a new medium, the mass-produced guidebook, to build a following and funnel them toward his own speculative venture. As Reed reads from the book, a debate begins to simmer within your group. The older, more experienced travelers are skeptical. You hear them muttering about the dangers of leaving the known trail. There's a reason the path goes where it goes. One old-timer with a face like a weathered map grumbles. It follows the water. You don't bet against the desert. But Reed is persuasive. He.S. a natural leader, and he paints a compelling picture. He argues that the trail is evolving, that new and better ways are always being discovered. Why stick to the old, slow path when progress offers a faster one? He points to the families, the tired women, the restless children. Think of what a month saved would mean for them. And this is where historical accounts get a bit fuzzy, where historians still debate the precise nature of the decision. Was the entire group convinced by Hastings' book, or was it primarily James Reed's enthusiasm that carried the day? Did the Donnerests, the nominal leaders, truly believe in the cutoff, or were they swayed by Reed's strong personality? Some accounts suggest. that Reed met a friend on the trail who vouched for Hastings, adding a layer of personal trust to the decision. Others argue that the group was already fracturing under the strain of the journey, and Reed's charisma offered a sense of decisive leadership that was appealing, even if the direction was questionable. You sit there, listening to the arguments. You feel the pull of both sides. The fear of the unknown is a cold knot in your stomach. But the exhaustion is real. Your back aches. Your mind is numb from the endless walking. The idea of reaching California before the first snows, it's a powerful lure. The book promises a shortcut not just through the mountains, but a shortcut to your new life. You look at the faces of your family, their features illuminated by the flickering firelight, and you wonder what the right choice is. The seed of the Hastings cutoff has been planted, and in the fertile soil of your hope and weariness, it is beginning to grow. The days crawl by, turning into weeks, and your wagon train pushes deeper into the vastness of what is now Wyoming. The landscape changes. The flat prairies give way to rolling hills and strange, sculptural rock formations that rise from the earth like ancient bones. Independence Rock, a massive granite outcrop that looks like a beached whale, serves as a giant guest book for the trail. You and your fellow travelers leave your names, painted in axle grease and tar, a fleeting mark of your passage. You feel a sense of shared history, of being part of something bigger than just your own small family unit. Eventually, you reach a place called the Little Sandy River. It's not much of a river, more of a lazy creek, but it's a significant landmark. This is the fork in the road. It's a literal and metaphorical crossroads. To the right lies the established route, the Fort Hall Road. It's the longer, safer, proven path. To the left lies a fainter track, leading south towards Fort Bridger. This is the beginning of the Hastings cutoff. The entire wagon train, hundreds of people, pulls to a halt. The air is thick with tension. This is it. The debate that began around the campfires weeks ago is now a full-blown council of families. People gather in anxious knots, the men talking in low, serious tones, the women watching, their faces etched with worry. This is the moment of the great schism. Most of the wagon train, the vast majority, chooses the right-hand path. They are sticking to the plan, to the tried and true. They wish you luck, but their expressions are a mixture of pity and disbelief. You watch their wagons creak and groan as they pull away, heading north. It feels like a lifeline being cut. The dust they kick up hangs in the air long after they're gone, a fading reminder of the safer choice. Your group, the one that will become infamous, turns left. Why the decision remains a subject of intense historical debate. It was just one family, but a collection of them. The Donneres, with their wealth and numerous wagons, give the choice a sense of legitimacy. If these successful, sensible men are willing to risk it, it must be viable. Right, James Reed, of course, is the most vocal proponent. His confidence unwavering. He is your unofficial cheerleader for the shortcut. The group that turns left is made up of about 87 people in 23 wagons. It's a mix of families: the Donneres, the Reeds, the Breen family from Ireland, the Murphys, the ADS, the Kes-Iberges. They are, for the most part, wealthier and less experienced than the average pioneer. They have more to lose, but also, perhaps, a greater sense of entitlement, a belief that their resources and intelligence can overcome any obstacle. This is a crucial point many historians highlight. It was the more affluent, city-bred folk who were most susceptible to the promise of an easier way. And here's a quirky, often overlooked detail about this moment. At this very crossroads, a lone horseman rides up to your group. It's an old friend of James Reed, a man named James Clyman, who is coming from the west. He is a genuine, grizzled mountain man, and he has just traveled parts of the route Hastings is promoting. He stops and pleads with Reed. He tells him, in no uncertain terms, not to take the cutoff. He describes the terrain as barely possible for a man on a mule and impossible for wagons. He warns of vast waterless deserts and impassable canyons. It's a direct, eyewitness account from a trusted source, completely contradicting the guidebook. This is one of those moments in history that is almost physically painful to contemplate. You are standing right there. You hear the warning. You see the sincerity in Clyman's sun-scorched face. And yet, James Reed in a move that has baffled scholars for generations, dismisses the warning. Why pride? A stubborn refusal to admit he might have been wrong, a blind faith in the printed word of Hastings, book over the spoken word of an experienced friend. The academic consensus leans towards a combination of ego and a kind of optimism bias. Reed was so invested in the idea of the cutoff, that championed it so fiercely, that to turn back now would be a public humiliation. He chose to believe the promise on the page, not the reality described by the man in front of him. And so you follow. You trust in the leadership of the Donors and the confidence of Reed. You watch the larger party disappear to the north, and a quiet sense of unease settles over your small, now isolated group. You've made your choice. The wagon wheels groan in protest as they turn onto the less traveled path. The sun beats down, and the trail ahead looks no different. But you feel it in your bones. The air has changed. You have left the mainstream of the Great Migration. The real journey, the one that will define you, has just begun. Your small caravan of wagons trundles south toward Fort Bridger, the last supposed outpost of civilization before the great leap into the unknown. The landscape feels emptier now. The comforting sight of dozens, even hundreds of other wagons stretching to the horizon is gone. Now it's just your little island of humanity, a string of 23 canvas tops bobbing on a sea of sagebrush. The sense of isolation is a low, persistent hum in the back of your mind. You arrive at Fort Bridger in late July. You expect to find Lansford Hastings himself, the author of your destiny, waiting to guide you through his promised land. But HES not there. HES already left, leading another small group on the cutoff. Instead, you find his business partner, Jim Bridger, the famous mountain man for whom the fort is named. The fort itself is less of a military installation and more of a rustic, ramshackle trading post. Its 2 log cabins with a stockade, smelling of tanned hides, horses, and chewing tobacco. Here you can trade for supplies, repair your wagon, and rest your animals. And, most importantly, you can get information. Bridger and his partner, Luis Vasquez, confirm what Hastings wrote in his book. They assure you the route ahead is a fine, level road with plenty of water and grass, except for one 40-mile stretch of desert. A dry drive of that length was not uncommon on the trail, a difficult but manageable today ordeal. They tell you it's a perfect route, a better way. You feel a wave of relief. The warnings from James Kleiman begin to feel like the cautious ramblings of an old man. These seasoned frontiersmen of an old man who live here, who know the land, are vouching for it. Here's the cold, hard historical truth: Jim Bridger was lying. This is a point that is no longer debated by serious historians. Fort Bridger was a business, and the old Fort Hall Road was diverting traffic, and thus customers, north of his post. Hastings' new cutoff funneled emigrants directly to Bridger's front door. It was in his financial interest to endorse the route, regardless of its true condition. He and Hastings were, in a sense, in cahoots. They were promoting a product, the cutoff, for their mutual benefit. Your life and the lives of your family were collateral in their business plan. And here's a sad, quirky little detail from this stop. While at the fort, the Donner Party encountered a woman named Mrs. Vasquez, the wife of Bridger's partner. She was of the Ute tribe, a local Native American group, and she knew the land intimately. Seeing your group, with its women and small children, preparing to take the cutoff, she reportedly tried to warn you. She did so not in English, but through urgent gestures, mimicking hardship, starvation, and death. She shook her head, made choking sound, and pointed to the faint trail with an expression of dread. But her warnings were dismissed by the men of your party as the dramatic hysterics of a savage woman who didn't understand their sophisticated plans. They chose to trust the comforting lies of the white businessman over the desperate, truthful pantomime of the indigenous woman who actually knew. Fort Bridger is your last chance to turn back. It's the final exit on the highway to disaster. But buoyed by Bridger's assurances, your group spends several days here, resting and resupplying. The mood is generally optimistic. The shortcut feels real, tangible. You are on the cusp of cheating the system, of beating the odds. While there, the group officially elects George Donner as its captain. It's a formality, really. HES, the wealthiest, the oldest, the most patriarch-like figure. But James Reed remains the driving force, the one with the maps and the unshakable confidence. Finally, the day comes to leave. It's the last day of July, 1846. The wagons are repaired, the animals are as rested as they're going to get, and your barrels are full of fresh water. You roll out of Fort Bridger, leaving the last vestiges of the known world behind. You are now fully committed. There are no more forks in the road, no more chances to rejoin the main trail. You look ahead. The path is not the fine, level road you were promised. It's barely a track. It winds into a mess of hills and canyons choked with aspen and willow trees. It's immediately clear this is not a wagon road. This is barely a deer trail. The first inkling of dread, cold and sharp, pierces through your optimism. The smooth, reassuring words spoken back at the fort evaporate in the hot, dry air. You look at the tangled mess of wilderness ahead, and you look at your heavy, cumbersome wagon, your mobile home filled with dresses and china, and you realize the promise and the reality are two very different things. The con is on. The moment you leave the relative safety of Fort Bridger, the reality of the shortcut slams into you. The fine, level road promised by Hastings and Bridger is a fantasy. Instead, you are immediately confronted by the Wasatch Mountains. This isn't a gentle, rolling landscape, it's a tangled, vertical maze of canyons and dense forest. The trail left by the small party Hastings was leading is almost invisible. It's not a road, it's a suggestion. And it's a bad one. Your wagon, which felt so sturdy and reliable on the plains, is now a clumsy, oversized beast. The path, if you can call it, that is so narrow and choked with brush that you can't simply drive through it. You have to build the road, yard by painful yard. This is where the real, back-breaking labor begins. The men of the party, you included, spend your days with axes in hand. You are no longer pioneers, you are a construction crew. You have to chop down thickets of willow and aspen trees that claw at the canvas tops of your wagons. You have to dig out the sides of hills to create a ledge wide enough for the wheels. You have to fill in gullies with rocks and logs. It's grueling, relentless work under a blazing sun. The pace is agonizingly slow. On a good day on the main trail, you might cover 15, maybe 20 miles. Here, you are lucky to make 2. Sometimes, after a full day of exhausting labor, you've moved less than a mile. You can look back at your morning's campsite and it's still distressingly close. Every evening, you collapse into your bedroll, your muscles screaming, your hands blistered and raw. The easy camaraderie of the early trail begins to fray. Tempers are short. Arguments erupt over small things, a misplaced tool, a perceived slight. One day, you come to a canyon that is completely impassable. The sides are too steep, the bottom too choked with boulders. The wagons halt. A sense of despair settles over the camp. You are stuck. Reed, ever proactive, suggests that a few men ride ahead to try and find Hastings. They need to know if this is even the right way. So Reed, along with 2 other men, gallops off into the wilderness, leaving the rest of you to wait and worry. While they are gone, you find a tattered note stuck to a bush. It's from Hastings. It's not the reassuring message you're hoping for. The note warns that the route ahead is impassable and advises you to wait for him to come back and show you a better way. This is a devastating blow. The man who wrote the book, the architect of this whole plan, is now telling you his own route is a failure. You wait. And wait. The days drag on. Your precious supplies, the food you so carefully calculated for the journey, are dwindling at an alarming rate. Your animals, the oxen that are the engines of this whole enterprise, are growing weaker. There is little good grass for them to eat in these rocky canyons. You watch them lose weight, their ribs starting to show. That's a terrifying sight, because their strength is your only hope of moving forward. Historians still debate the group's decision-making process at this point. Faced with Hastings' note, the logical choice would have been to turn back to Fort Bridger. It would have been humiliating, a massive loss of time, but it would have been safe. Why didn't they? Some argue. It was the sunk cost fallacy in action. You've already invested so much time and effort into this route that the thought of giving it all up feels worse than the risk of pushing forward. Others point to the group's internal dynamics. A retreat would have been a massive admission of failure, particularly for James Reed, and the social cost of that was, at the time, unthinkable. Here's a small, poignant detail that illustrates the group's state of mind. To pass the time and keep morale up, some of the party engaged in whittling. They carved small toys for the children or intricate patterns into scraps of wood. It was a way to focus the mind, to create a tiny bit of order and beauty in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. Imagine sitting there, in a hostile wilderness, your future hanging by a thread, and taking the time to carve a perfect little bird out of a piece of aspen. It's a testament to the human need for purpose, even in the most desperate of circumstances. Finally, Reed returns. He hasn't found Hastings. Instead, he explored a different canyon, one he believes is passable. It's not easy, he admits, but he thinks it can be done. The group, desperate for any sort of forward momentum, latches onto this shred of hope. They decide to trust Reed's scouting over Hastings' warning. The work becomes even harder. To get through the new canyon, you have to haul the wagons, one by one, up a near vertical slope using chains and multiple teams of oxen. It's a dangerous, terrifying process. A snapped chain or a slipping ox could send a wagon, your entire home and livelihood, crashing to the bottom of the canyon. But you do it. You push, you pull, you sweat, and you pray. And after 18 days of this Herculean labor, you finally emerge from the Wasatch Mountains. You've traveled just 36 miles. It should have taken you 2 days. It took you nearly 3 weeks. You are exhausted. Your supplies are dangerously low. And the long, flat expanse of the Great Salt Lake Desert lies waiting for you. You emerge from the tangled hell of the Wasatch Mountains onto a wide, flat plain. The sky opens up, vast and mercilessly blue. In the distance, shimmering under the relentless late summer sun, you see the Great Salt Lake. For a moment, the open space feels like a relief. No more trees to chop, no more canyons to navigate. But that relief is short-lived, replaced by a new, more profound kind of anxiety. This is the beginning of the desert. Your path now curves around the southern edge of the lake. The ground is soft and alkaline, a fine white dust that kicks up and coats everything, a ghostly film on your clothes, in your hair, and at the back of your throat. It has a bitter, chemical taste. The water sources become scarce and increasingly foul. The few springs you find are brackish, barely drinkable. Your animals suffer the most. The oxen, little nourishment, already weakened from the ordeal in the mountains, begin to fail. Their movements become slower, more lethargic. You look into their big, patient eyes and see a dullness that wasn't there before. This is when the real rationing begins. Not of food, not yet, but of water. Water becomes the most precious commodity you have. You measure it out in careful cupfuls. The thirst is a constant, physical presence. It's a dry, scratchy feeling in your throat that no amount of swallowing can fix. It makes you irritable, headachy, and unable to think clearly. And it's not just the water that's running out. It's patience. The frayed nerves from the mountains start to snap in the oppressive heat of the desert. The group, once bound by a common goal, is now a collection of tense, bickering families. The main historical narrative of this period focuses on the fracturing of the group's social cohesion. Trust, the invisible glue holding you all together, begins to dissolve. Arguments become a daily occurrence. You argue over the pace of travel. Some families whose oxen are still relatively strong want to push ahead. Others with weaker animals are forced to go slower, and they accuse the faster families of trying to abandon them. You argue over grazing spots. You argue over shared resources. Old friendships become strained, and new resentments fester. James Reed, once the confident leader, finds his authority eroding. People now look at him with a mixture of anger and blame. His grand promises of a shortcut now sound like cruel jokes. Here's a bizarre and little-known incident from this leg of the journey that highlights the psychological strain. One of the German immigrants in your party, a man named Hardcoop, was an elderly man traveling alone. As his strength failed, he was forced to ride in a wagon. The family whose wagon he was in, the Kessiber guests, eventually told him he could no longer ride. He was forced to try and keep up on foot. He fell behind. Were you Mehdi, one of the more compassionate members of the group, pleaded with the others to stop and wait for him, but the consensus was to push on. Hardcoop was last seen sitting by a creek, his feet swollen and bleeding, unable to go any further. He was the first person your party lost, not to an accident or violence, but to a collective desperate indifference. Historians are still divided on the exact details of Hardcoop's abandonment. Was he truly cast out, or did he simply wander off and get lost? Was it a conscious, cruel decision, or the result of a breakdown in communication and a desperate focus on self-preservation? Most accounts suggest the former, a chilling preview of the brutal choices the party would later have to make. As you finally clear the marshes and soft terrain around the lake, you reach the last freshwater spring before the main desert crossing. This is the spot Bridger had told you about. The start of the 40-mile dry drive. You are supposed to rest here, water the animals thoroughly, and fill every possible container with water for the journey. You do this, but with a sense of dread. The animals are in terrible shape, and the morale of the group is at rock bottom. You look out at what lies ahead. It's a vast, white, perfectly flat expanse of salt-crusted earth, shimmering undistorted in the heat haze. It looks like a frozen lake, an alien landscape utterly devoid of life. There is no grass, no shrubs, no sign of anything living. It is the most desolate place you have ever seen. You know that once you step onto that salt flat, there is no turning back. You have to make it to the other side. Your 40-mile today ordeal is about to begin, or so you think. The decision to cross the Great Salt Lake Desert is not really a decision at all. It's an inevitability. To turn back now would be a journey of hundreds of miles through terrain that nearly destroyed you. The only way is forward. So you rest your animals for a few precious days at the spring, letting them drink their fill. You fill every barrel cask and pot with water, knowing that what you can carry is all you will have. This is the moment you have to make some truly painful choices. Your wagons, filled with the dreams and comforts of a future life, are too heavy. The oxen are too weak. You have to lighten the load drastically. You begin to unload your possessions onto the white, dusty ground. It's a surreal and heartbreaking process. You are creating a strange, temporary museum of hopes and memories at the edge of this wasteland. That heavy old presser, the one you struggled so hard to get through the mountains, it has to go. You heave it out of the wagon, where it lands with a solid, final thud. Your grandmother's china, so carefully packed there's no place for it now. You leave the crates sitting by the trail. The symbols of your old life are discarded. Books are piled up, their leather covers already starting to warp in the heat. Children's toys, spare tools, fancy clothes all are jettisoned. James Reed, in a particularly dramatic and symbolic act, is forced to abandon his Pioneer Palace car. The ostentatious two-story wagon is simply too big and heavy for the ordeal ahead. He has to cache most of its contents, burying them in a pit with the hope of one day returning to retrieve them. He and his family are forced to cram into a more standard, functional wagon. The great symbol of his status and ambition is left behind, a monument to his folly. This forced shedding of possessions is a well-documented part of the Donner Party story, a physical manifestation of their dwindling hopes. But here's a detail that often gets lost: what you choose to keep is as telling as what you throw away. You don't keep the furniture, but you keep the extra sack of flour. You don't keep the books, but you keep the spare axle. The hierarchy of needs becomes brutally clear. The things that define your culture, your family history, your identity, they are all secondary to the raw, functional tools of survival. You are stripping yourselves down to the bare essentials. Historians often ponder the psychological impact of this moment. Did it feel liberating, in a strange way, to be unburdened from the weight of the past, or was it a profoundly demoralizing act? A final admission that your dream of transplanting your old life to California was dead? The consensus is that it was almost certainly the latter. Each discarded object was a piece of your future. Watching it all being left behind felt like a funeral for the life you thought you were going to have. With the wagons now lighter, though still painfully heavy, you begin the crossing. You decide to travel at night to avoid the worst of the daytime heat. As the sun sets, casting long, distorted shadows across the salt flats, your diminished caravan lurches forward. The scene is eerie and otherworldly. The ground is a hard, cracked crust of salt over a layer of soft, damp mud. The wheels of the wagon sometimes break through the crust, and the wagon sinks to its axles in the sticky goo. When this happens, it takes hours of exhausting work, with multiple teams of exhausted oxen to pull it free. The silence is absolute. There are no birds, no wind in the sagebrush. The only sounds are the creaking of the wagons, the lowing of the suffering oxen, and the soft crunch of your own feet on the salt. The moonlight reflects off the white surface, creating a ghostly, sterile landscape. It feels like you're walking on the moon. You look up at the stars, which seem brighter and colder than ever before, and you feel a sense of profound, cosmic loneliness. You are just a tiny, insignificant speck crawling across a dead world. The 40-mile today journey has begun. You hold on to that number 40 miles like a prayer. It's the only thing giving you hope. You're now deep in the heart of the salt desert, moving through the cool of the night. The 40-mile estimate from Bridger is your mantra, the number you repeat to yourself to keep going. But as the second night of travel begins, a terrifying realization dawns on you. The math is wrong. The math is wrong. Horribly wrong. You should be nearing the other side by now. You should be seeing the dark shape of mountains on the horizon, the promised land of fresh water and grass. But there is nothing, white expanse in every direction. This is the moment of pure, unadulterated betrayal. The 40-mile dry drive was not 40 miles. It was closer to 80th. An extra 40 miles might not sound like much, but for you, it's a death sentence. You had packed exactly enough water for the journey you were promised. The barrels are now almost empty. The last of the water is doled out in mouthfuls, not even enough to quench the burning in your throat, just enough to moisten your tongue. Your oxen, the real heroes and victims of this journey, begin to collapse. The lack of water and food, combined with the soul-crushing labor of pulling the wagons through the mud, is too much for them. You see it happen in slow motion. An ox will stumble, its legs buckling. It will try to get up, its massive head straining, but its strength is gone. It will collapse onto the salt-crusted ground with a great, sighing groan, and it will not get up again. This is a catastrophic turning point. Each ox that falls is a blow to your chances of survival. These animals are not just livestock, they are your engines. Without them, your wagons are just heavy, useless boxes of wooden canvas. Your entire world, your food, your shelter, is stranded. When the first ox goes down, there is a frantic effort to save it. You unyoke it, try to coax it with the last drops of water, but it's no use. You are forced to abandon it, still breathing, its large brown eyes watching you as you walk away. It's a gut-wrenching moment. You have to unhitch the remaining, exhausted animals and attach them to the stranded wagon, doubling their load. This, of course, only hastens their own collapse. Soon, the trail behind you is dotted with the dark shapes of fallen and abandoned animals. The Reed family, with their heavy load, is hit the hardest. They lose almost all of their oxen. One by one they fall, until James Reed is left with a single ox to pull a wagon meant for a full team. It's an impossible task. Faced with this disaster, Reed makes a desperate choice. He unhitches his last remaining animal and rides ahead on a horse, hoping to find water and come back for his family, who are now completely stranded in the middle of the desert with no animals and no water. His wife, Margaret, and their children are left behind to wait, watching him disappear into the shimmering heat haze. This is a well-documented event, but here's a lesser-known, deeply human detail about it. As the oxen began to die, the pioneers didn't immediately see them as food. For months, these animals had been their companions, their partners in labor. There was a bond. The first reaction was not to butcher them but to mourn them. It took a while for the desperate logic of survival to overcome this emotional connection. The idea of eating an animal you'd worked alongside, an animal that had a name, was a psychological barrier they had to cross. Historians still debate the exact number of cattle lost in the desert. The survivors' accounts vary, clouded by trauma and time, but the consensus is that the Donner Party lost at least 36 head of cattle, which represented a huge portion of their draft animals and a massive loss of future food. More importantly, it was the moment they lost mobility. They were not a wagon train. They were a scattered collection of stranded refugees. You, meanwhile, are struggling with your own team. You watch your animals suffer, and a cold dread fills you. You abandon one wagon, consolidating all your essential supplies into another, just to lessen the load. The dresser, the china, they seemed like difficult sacrifices at the time. Now, the thought of them is a bitter joke. You would trade every heirloom you own for a single bucket of fresh water. Finally, after 5 agonizing days, you stumble off the salt flats and reach the other side. But the cost is staggering. The party is shattered. Wagons and precious belongings are abandoned across 80 miles of desert. Dozens of your essential animals are dead. And James Reed's family is still out there, somewhere in that white hell, waiting. The shortcut has now cost you more than you could ever have imagined. And the worst part is you're not in California. You're not even close. You've just survived the frying pan, only to find yourself heading directly into the fire. Stumbling out of the salt desert feels like being reborn into a nightmare. You've reached the other side, but the other side is just more desert, albeit with some sparse, withered grass and the occasional murky spring. The relief of being off the salt flats is immediately replaced by the chaos of the situation. Your party is no longer a cohesive unit, it's a scattered mess of traumatized survivors. The first order of business is a desperate, frantic search for water. People fan out, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. When a spring is finally found, you don't walk to it, you fall towards it. You plunge your face into the muddy water, drinking so fast you choke. It's the best thing you have ever tasted. Then comes the grim accounting. Who made it, who didn't? Wagons straggle in over the next day or two. Some are pulled by a single skeletal ox. Some are being pulled by the people themselves. Their shoulders rough from the yoke. Many wagons don't arrive at all. They are still out there on the flats, monuments to your folly. The Reed family is still missing. A desperate rescue effort is mounted. Men on the few remaining horses ride back into the desert with water. They find Margaret Reed and her children huddled under their wagon, near death from dehydration. They are saved, but their wagons and all their possessions are lost. Your group has suffered a catastrophic loss of resources, but for now, everyone who entered the desert is alive, except for the abandoned hard coop. But the psychological toll is immense. The trust is gone. You look at your fellow travelers not as companions, but as competitors for scarce resources. It's in this atmosphere of stress, blame, and desperation that the first human-on-human violence erupts. It happens a few days later, as you're struggling up a steep, sandy hill near a place now called Gravelly Ford. The remaining wagons are getting stuck. Tempers are incandescent. The incident involves two men: James Reed, the now disgraced champion of the cutoff, and a teamster named John Snyder, who works for another family. Snyder's whipping his ox team furiously, trying to get them up the hill. Reed's team gets entangled with another, blocking the path. Harsh words are exchanged. Snyder, enraged, starts beating Reed's oxen. Reed intervenes. The argument escalates with terrifying speed. According to eyewitness accounts, Snyder swore at Reed and then struck him on the head with the butt end of his heavy whip. Not once, but twice. Reed, bleeding and staggering, instinctively drew a large hunting knife he wore on his belt. As Snyder came at him for a third blow, Reed plunged the knife into Snyder's chest. Snyder stumbled back, looked down at the wound in disbelief, and died within minutes. The camp is thrown into chaos. This is not a death from starvation or accident. This is a killing, in the unwritten law of the trail. This is a capital crime. An immediate, impromptu trial is held. The situation is incredibly tense. The group is already divided, and many people already blame Reed for their predicament. They see this as the final, unforgivable act of a man whose arrogance has doomed them all. This is the mainstream historical account of the first death within the party from violence. But there is, as always, a debate among historians about the nuances. Was Reed acting in pure self-defense? Most accounts suggest he was. Snyder was the aggressor. But was the use of a knife a proportional response, and how much did the existing resentment towards Reed influence the desire for execution? Some argue that the call for his hanging was less about justice for Snyder and more about finding a scapegoat for the entire disaster. They wanted to punish someone, and Reed was the obvious target. Here's a small, lesser-known detail. Margaret Reed, James's wife, played a crucial role in saving her husband's life. While the men were abating his fate, she went from family to family, pleading for mercy. She reminded them of their shared past, of the friendships they had formed back in Illinois. Her diplomacy, combined with the fact that Reed did have friends in the party who stood by him, managed to turn the tide. In the end, a compromise is reached. They will not hang him, but he must be banished. He is to be cast out of the party, sent into the wilderness alone without food or a weapon, to fend for himself. It is, for all intents and purposes, a death sentence. The next morning, you watch as James Reed, the man who started this journey in a two-story palace car, prepares to leave. His daughter, Virginia, secretly smuggles him a rifle and a small amount of food. He says a heartbreaking goodbye to his wife and children, promising he will get to California and send back help. Then he turns and walks away, a solitary figure disappearing into the vast, empty landscape. The group has now lost another of its strongest men, not to the element, but to its own internal fractures. The descent is getting faster, with James Reed banished and John Snyder buried. A grim quiet settles over your camp. You've survived the salt desert, but you've been hobbled. Your progress along the Humboldt River is painfully slow. The river itself is a cruel joke. For much of its length, it's not a flowing body of water but a sluggish, alkaline stream winding through a barren landscape. The promised meadows on its banks are mostly sagebrush and sand. The journey becomes a brutal, monotonous slog. You are in a race against time and you are losing. It's now late September, and the days are getting noticeably shorter. The nights have a sharp, cold edge to them that hints at the coming winter. You know you need to cross the Sierra Nevada mountains before the snow falls, but the mountains still feel impossibly far away. Your group has split into two main factions, a physical manifestation of the social fractures that have been growing for weeks. The Donnerettes, with their own cluster of family and teamsters, fall behind. Their pace is slower, their resources more strained. The other families, including yours, push ahead, forming a faster-moving group. The two are often separated by a day or two of travel. There is little communication between them. The idea of being one unified party is a distant memory. It is during this period that you encounter the local Native American population, the Paiute people. Your interactions with them are fraught with misunderstanding and fear. To you and most of your fellow travelers, they are a source of anxiety. You see them as shadowy figures who watch you from the hills, a potential threat to your dwindling resources. There are reports of them shooting at your cattle with arrows, not out of aggression but desperation. Weakened animals are an easy source of food for a people who are also struggling to survive in this harsh landscape. This is the standard historical narrative. The pioneers saw the natives as hostile. But here's a perspective that is often missing from the popular retelling. For the Paiute, your wagon train was a slow-moving disaster that was destroying their ecosystem. Your oxen were consuming the precious grass that their own game animals and horses needed. You were depleting the water sources. From their perspective, you were the invaders, a destructive force in their ancestral lands. Their attacks on your cattle were not acts of war, they were acts of survival, taking a resource that was consuming their own. Historians who have studied Paiute oral histories and archaeological evidence are still trying to piece together a more balanced view of these encounters. The narrative from the pioneer diaries is one-sided, colored by fear and prejudice. The truth is likely a complex story of two desperate groups competing for survival in an environment that could barely support one of them. One night, the German man in your group named John Wolfinger, who is rumored to be carrying a large amount of gold, disappears. His two traveling companions claim he was killed by natives, but some in the party whisper that he was murdered for his money by the very men he was traveling with. Nothing is ever proven, but the suspicion hangs in the air. Another drop of poison in the well of your community's trust. Then you come face to face with the next ordeal, a section of the trail that William Eddy, one of the few who kept a detailed journal, would later call the long drive or the long thirst. After the Humboldt River sinks into the sand and disappears, you have to cross another desert. It's not as vast or as flat as the Great Salt Lake Desert, but it is just as deadly. You are told it's a 40-mile stretch with no water. You should know better by now than to trust that number. It turns out to be closer to 50 or 60 miles of grueling sand and rock. The journey is a waking nightmare, a repeat of the salt desert but with animals and people who are already at their breaking point. Oxen, maddened by thirst, become uncontrollable. Some of them, smelling water that is miles away, simply bolt, running off into the desert to die alone. You are forced to abandon more wagons, more precious supplies. The trail of discarded belongings you started at the edge of the salt desert now continues here. You are shedding your civilization piece by piece. By the time you finally reach the Truckee River, the gateway to the Sierra Nevada, you are ghosts. You are skeletal, exhausted, and almost completely out of food. You have lost most of your animals. The party is in tatters. It is now late October. You look up at the mountains ahead. The peaks are already dusted with white. The first snows have fallen. You have lost the race. Reaching the Truckee River feels like a monumental achievement, but it's a hollow victory. The river, rushing cool and clear out of the mountains, is life. You and your animals drink deeply, the first clean, sweet water you've tasted in what feels like an eternity. The banks are lined with cottonwood trees, their leaves are brilliant, almost defiant yellow against the dark pines. It's beautiful, but it's a terrifying kind of beauty, because as you look up past the trees you see them. The Sierra Nevada. They don't look like the gentle, rolling hills you're used to. They look like a wall. A colossal, jagged barrier of granite and timber rising up to a sharp, cold sky. And worse, you can see that the higher peaks are already white, not just dusted but covered. Snow. The one thing you have been racing against for months has caught you. A palpable sense of panic begins to ripple through the camp. The air itself has changed. The days are still sunny, but the light is thin and weak. The nights are now bitterly, dangerously cold. You wake up in the mornings to a thick layer of frost on your blankets. The race is over, and you are on the wrong side of the finish line. It's now the end of October, on the normal Oregon Trail schedule. You should have been in California a month ago. You should be basking in the sun of Sutter's Fort, your ordeal a story to tell your grandchildren. Instead, you are here, at the foot of a high mountain pass, with winter breathing down your neck. The party is still fractured. The main group, including your family, pushes up the Truckee River Canyon. The going is brutal. The canyon is steep and narrow, and you have to cross the icy river over and over again. The water is so cold it feels like it's burning your skin. Your remaining animals, weak and emaciated, struggle to pull the last few wagons over the rocky terrain. Meanwhile, the Donner families are still far behind. George Donner had injured his hand while repairing an axle, a cut that seemed minor at the time but was becoming infected and swollen. His family and their wagons had to stop to tend to him, falling even further behind the main group. They are now completely isolated, a separate, desperate entity. This is a key point often emphasized by historians, the final separation of the party into at least two, and arguably three, distinct groups: the main party at the lake, the Donneress a few miles back, and the banished James Reed somewhere far ahead was a critical factor in the disaster. A larger, unified group would have had more resources, more manpower, and a better chance of organizing a rescue or a successful escape. But your divisions, born of arguments and hardship, now become a fatal strategic weakness. As you struggle up the canyon, a sliver of hope arrives. Two men, William Big Bill McCutcheon and Charles Stanton, appear. Stanton was a member of your party who, weeks earlier, had ridden ahead with McCutcheon to Sutter's Fort in California to get supplies. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort. Stanton has returned, bringing with him 7 mules loaded with flour and dried beef, provisions sent by Captain John Sutter, the benevolent ruler of the California settlement. He also brings to my court guides, Luis and Salvador. The arrival of these supplies is a miracle. It's the first real food you've seen in weeks. For a moment it feels like you might just make it. But here's a sad, Little known detail about Charles Stanton. He didn't have to come back. He was a single man, a bachelor with no family in the party. He had made it safely to California. He could have stayed there, started his new life. But he was a man of immense integrity. He had promised he would return, and so he did. He rode back into the jaws of the coming winter, out of a pure sense of duty to the people he had traveled with. He is one of the quiet, unsung heroes of this story. Stanton's news, however, is a mixed blessing. He confirms that the pass is just ahead, but he also confirms that the weather is turning fast. He urges you to push on with all possible speed. There is no time to lose. Bolstered by the fresh supplies and the desperate urgency of Stanton's warning, you make one final, frantic push for the summit. You arrive at the shore of a high mountain lake, a beautiful, pristine body of water surrounded by towering pines. It would be an idyllic spot under any other circumstances. Today, it's a place of dread. The pass, the final gate to California, is just a few miles ahead. You can see the notch in the mountains. It looks so close. A few of the stronger members of the party push ahead to scout the pass. They return with devastating news. The snow is already 5 feet deep. It is a soft, powdery snow that you sink into up to your waist. It's impossible to find the trail. The wagons cannot get through. You are trapped. You have reached the end of the line. The snow wall has slammed shut. The news that the pass is blocked by 5 feet of snow descends on your camp like a physical weight. It's not a loud, panicked moment. It's a quiet, crushing realization. A collective, hollowed-out silence. You look at the wall of white that separates you from safety, and you understand. You are not going to California, not today. Not today. You are camped on the eastern shore of a large mountain lake, which will one day be known as Donner Lake. The date is November 4th, 1846. That night, the sky, which had been a clear, cold blue, turns a heavy, uniform gray, and then it begins to snow. It's not a gentle flurry. It's a blizzard. A thick, wet, relentless torrent of snow that falls for days on end. It erases the world. It buries the landscape, the trees, the wagons, and your hopes under a thick, white blanket. The sound of the wind howling through the pines is a constant, mournful cry. You huddle in your wagon under canvas that offers little protection from the biting cold, and you listen to the storm that is burying you alive. This is the central, defining event of the Donner Party saga becoming snowbound. They had run out of time, and now they were imprisoned by the very mountains they sought to cross. The choice to take the shortcut had eaten up their entire margin of error. A journey that should have ended in September was now facing a high Sierra winter in November. When the storm finally breaks after more than a week, the world is unrecognizable. The snow is not 5 feet deep anymore. It's 10, 15, in some places 20 feet deep. The tops of the tallest pines are bowed under the weight. Your wagons are just rounded humps in a vast, white desert. You have to dig tunnels to get from one shelter to another. The air is thin and brutally cold. Your first priority is shelter. The cumber-stopped wagons are not enough. You have to build cabins. This is where the group's remaining strength is focused. You are surrounded by a forest, so there is lumber. But you are not builders. You are farmers and businessmen. Your tools are inadequate. A few axes, maybe a saw. Your bodies are weak from months of malnutrition and exhaustion. 3 cabins are eventually erected. They are crude, desperate structures. The Breen family takes over an existing cabin, a small hunter's shanty that was already there. The Murphy and Eddy families build a cabin against a large boulder, using the rock as one wall. The Kess-Eberg family builds a lean-to adjacent to them. These cabins are small, dark, and filthy. The roofs are made of hide and canvas, which leak constantly. The floors and earth, smoke from the central fire, which must be kept burning at all times, fills the small space, stinging your eyes and coating everything with a layer of greasy soot. You are crammed in with multiple families, strangers just a few weeks ago, now sharing a space so intimate you can hear every cough, every whisper, every cry. Here's a small, often overlooked detail about these cabins: they had no windows. light and fresh air were sacrificed for warmth. The only light came from the fire at the doorway, which was usually covered with a quilt to keep out the wind. Imagine spending 22 hours a day in a dark, smoky, overcrowded room, listening to the wind howl outside, knowing that your survival depends on the meager pile of food you have left. The psychological pressure must have been unimaginable. And what about the Donores? They never made it to the lake. They are trapped about 6 miles back, at a place called Alder Creek. Their situation is even worse. They have no existing structure to build on. They are forced to create what were essentially tents, draping canvas and quilts over a frame of pine branches. These shelters are even less substantial, offering minimal protection from the elements. George Donner's infected hand has worsened, leaving him largely incapacitated. They are isolated, weaker, and in even more dire straits than the group at the lake. Historians still debate whether the group at the lake could have done more to help the Donores at Alder Creek. Could they have sent men back to help them build a proper cabin? The historical record is unclear. By this point, communication was almost non-existent, and each family unit was focused entirely on its own survival. The party had ceased to exist in any meaningful way. It was now just a collection of desperate, starving families, each trapped in their own little pocket of winter hell. The snow keeps falling. Days blur into a monotonous cycle of trying to stay warm, rationing what little food is left, and staring at the crude walls of your shelter. You look at the faces of your family, their skin pale and stretched tight over their bones, and you feel a despair so profound it has no words. The beautiful, pristine lake outside your door is now your prison. The reality of your imprisonment sinks in with the deepening snow. You are not just delayed, you are besieged. Winter in the Sierra Nevada is not a passive season, it's an active, aggressive force. The initial task of building shelters, as grueling as it was, is over. Now begins the long, slow, terrifying ordeal of waiting. The first thing you do is take a formal inventory of the food. All the remaining supplies are brought together to be managed as a common stock. This includes the flour and dried beef brought back by Charles Stanton, as well as the meager reserves of the individual families. The man put in charge of this grim task is Patrick Bream, the patriarch of the Irish family. He is a literate man and begins to keep a diary, a document that will become one of the most important primary sources for understanding what happened next. The rations are minuscule. At first, it's a few ounces of dried beef and a small spoonful of flour per person per day. It's barely enough to keep a child alive, let alone an adult. The hunger is a constant, gnawing presence. It's more than just an empty feeling in your stomach, it's a physical pain, a mental obsession. You think about food constantly. You dream about it. You dream about it. You talk about it. You remember every meal you've ever eaten in lavish, painful detail. This strict rationing is the central documented fact of this period. The party understood that their only hope was to stretch their supplies. Until a rescue team could arrive, a rescue they could only pray was coming. As the days turn into weeks, the cattle, the few that survived the journey to the lake, are slaughtered. They are already skeletal, offering little meat, but every part of them is used. The meat is rationed, the organs are eaten, and even the blood is saved and boiled. The hides, the tough, hairy skins of the animals, are put aside. You don't know it yet, but they will become your next source of food. The small community at the lake and the separate, even more desperate one at Alder Creek settles into a grim routine. The men's job is to fell trees for firewood. It's exhausting, dangerous work. You have to stand on top of the 15-foot deep snowpack to chop down a tree, meaning the stumps, when the snow melts, will be 15 feet high. The women's work is to cook the meager rations, tend to the children, and try to maintain some semblance of order and cleanliness in the cramped, filthy cabin. Here's a small, poignant detail that reveals the psychological state of the group. To fight off the despair, they tried to maintain social norms. They observed the Sabbath. Patrick Breen's diary is filled with references to prayer and his Catholic faith. The children, as children do, still tried to play. They would play games inside the smoky cabins. Their laughter is strange, thin sound in the heavy silence. Thin sound in the heavy silence. Virginia Reed, who was 13, remembered her mother brushing the children's hair every day, a simple, Maternal ritual that was a tiny act of defiance against the encroaching chaos. It was an attempt to remain civilized, to hold on to the memory of who they were before they became trapped animals. But the severity was a thin veneer. The pressure was immense. Historians who have studied the diaries and letters of the survivors often discuss the concept of expedition behavior, the psychological dynamics that emerge in small, isolated groups under extreme stress. All the petty grievances and personality clashes from the trail are now amplified in the claustrophobic cabins. The Kess-Eberg family was particularly ostracized. Louis Kess-Eberg was a German immigrant who was widely disliked and distrusted, partly due to his foreigners and partly due to his abrasive personality. He and his family were often accused of hoarding food, a suspicion that would have devastating consequences later. The first death at the lake camp from starvation occurs in mid-December. A young man named Badas Williams, who worked for the Reed family, dies quietly in the Breen cabin. His death is a grim turning point. It's the moment the abstract threat of starvation becomes a concrete reality. He is buried in the snow, a simple, solemn act. But his death is a harbinger. You look around at the hollowed-out faces in your cabin, and you know he will not be the last. The long, dark heart of winter has just begun. The death of Bayless Williams is like a starting pistol for a race no one wants to run. The grim reality is that your meager rations are not enough. The initial inventory of food, which seemed so precious, is dwindling with terrifying speed. The beef is gone. The flour is almost gone. You are now starving in earnest. This is when you turn to the hides. The tough, hairy skins of the slaughtered oxen, which had been set aside on the roofs of the cabins, are now your only hope. Preparing them is a disgusting and laborious process. First, you have to hold the hide over the fire to burn off the thick hair. The smell is nauseating. The stench of burning hair and scorching leather fills your small cabin and clings to your clothes. Once the hair is gone, you cut the hide into strips and boil it. You boil it for hours, and hours, and hours. The hide itself is indigestible, but with enough boiling, it breaks down into a foul, gelatinous paste. A gluey, translucent goo. It has almost no nutritional value, but it fills the stomach. It quiets the gnawing emptiness for a little while. This is your meal, a spoonful of stinking, sticky jelly. You force it down, trying not to gag. This practice, boiling hides for sustenance, is a well-documented survival tactic of the era, but for your party, it was a major step down the ladder of desperation. It was the moment you stopped eating food and started eating objects. The children, in particular, suffer. They cry constantly from hunger. Their small bodies are emaciated, their bellies swollen from malnutrition. You watch them weaken, and a feeling of absolute helplessness washes over you. There is nothing you can do. As you choke down your leather soup, you also begin to gnaw on any bones you can find. You char them in the fire until they are brittle, then you break them up and boil them, trying to extract any last bit of marrow or nutrient. Sometimes you grind them into a coarse powder and mix it with your hide jelly to give it some substance. It's a gritty, revolting meal, but it's something. This is when the cold, hard biological facts of starvation begin to manifest. Your body starts to consume itself. First, it burns through your fat reserves. Then, it begins to break down your muscle tissue. You become skeletal, your skin stretched like parchment over your bones. You are racked with constant, painful hunger pangs. You become weak, apathetic, unable to perform even the simplest tasks. Your mind, starved of glucose, becomes foggy and confused. Memory fails. Unreal quality. Here's a bizarre and little-known detail from the survivors' accounts. As their bodies wasted away, many of them experienced a strange symptom: their hair fell out, and in some cases, their fingernails and toenails loosened and fell off as well. It was a sign of severe protein deficiency, their bodies literally starting to come apart. Imagine the psychological horror of that, not just feeling yourself starving, but physically seeing your body deconstruct itself. Historians and medical experts who have studied the Donner Party often point to the different stages of starvation and how they map onto the group's behavior. The initial irritability and social friction were classic early-stage symptoms. The apathy, confusion, and eventual delirium that some experienced were signs of the final, terminal stages. The decision-making capacity of the group was severely compromised long before the food actually ran out. They were not thinking clearly, because they physically couldn't. The situation is even more dire at the older Crete camp where the Donner families are trapped. They are more isolated and had even fewer resources to begin with. They are starving faster. They send a desperate messenger to the lake camp, pleading for help, but there is no help to give. The lake camp has nothing left. By late December, with the snow still falling and no sign of rescue, a new and terrible idea begins to form. Waiting for help is no longer a viable strategy. If anyone is to survive, they have to get help themselves. They have to try and cross the mountains on foot. It's a desperate, suicidal plan. But it's the only plan they have left. The decision is made to form a small party to attempt the crossing. They will be remembered as the forlorn hope. The decision to send a party over the mountains is born not of hope, but of its absolute absence. The name they chose for themselves, the forlorn hope, says it all. It was a term from military history describing soldiers sent on a mission from which they were not expected to return. Everyone, including those who were going, knew it was almost certainly a suicide mission. The group consists of 17 members, a mix of the strongest remaining men and, surprisingly, 5 women. The women Sarah Graves, Herd Orsha, Mary Ann, Sarah Fostick, and the sisters Harriet and Lavina Murphy insisted on going. They argued, correctly, that they were just as tough as the men and that staying in the cabins was a certain death sentence anyway. This inclusion of women in such a physically demanding escape attempt was unusual for the era and speaks to their incredible resilience. Their preparations are meager and desperate. Their primary challenge is the snow. You can't walk through 20 feet of soft powder. You need snowshoes. But no one in your party has ever seen a snowshoe, let alone built one. Using scraps of wood from oxbows and strips of leather from the remaining hides, they fashion crude, clumsy frames. They look more like small tennis rackets than functional snowshoes. This improvisation is a well-documented and crucial part of the story. Their survival depended entirely on these homemade tools. For food, they have almost nothing. Each member of the Forlorn Hope is given a tiny ration, meant to last for 6 days. It consists of a small strip of dried beef, what little was left, a spoonful of sugar, and a couple of ounces of the disgusting boiled hide jelly. It's a starvation diet for a journey that would require thousands of calories a day. On December 16, 1846, they set out. You watched them go, a small, dark line of figures shuffling away from the cabins and disappearing into the vast, white wilderness. Among them is Charles Stanton, the man who had already saved them once. He is weak, his eyesight failing from malnutrition, but he goes anyway, along with the 2 Mycourt guides, Luis and Salvador, who know the mountains but are just as starved as everyone else. The journey is a special kind of hell from the very first step. The homemade snowshoes are awkward and poorly designed. They sink into the snow, making every step an exhausting effort. The cold is relentless. At night they have no shelter. They dig a pit in the snow, build a small fire on a platform of green logs, and huddle together for warmth, their blankets frozen stiff by morning. On the 3rd day, they are hit by a blizzard. They are high in the mountains, completely exposed. They can't see, they can't move. They are trapped in a swirling vortex of wind and snow. For 2 days, they lie in their snow pit, unable to light a fire, the snow piling up on top of them. The psychological toll is immense. They are cold, starving, and completely disoriented. Here's a small, grim detail from the diary of Patrick Breen, who was back at the lake camp. During the same storm, he wrote, "Still snowing, now about 3 feet deep. Wind W. Snow blows in from the top of the cabin. While the Forlorn Hope was fighting for its life on the summit, you and the others were huddling in your smoky cabins, the snow literally burying you, completely unaware of the life and death struggle happening just a few miles away. When the storm finally breaks, the Forlorn Hope is in a catastrophic state. They are lost. Charles Stanton, the hero of the party, can go no further. He is snow-blind and exhausted. He sits down in the snow, smokes his pipe, and tells the others to go on without him. He says he will follow shortly. They know he won't. He dies there alone. He dies there alone, a man of incredible honor, sacrificed to the mountains. His death is a devastating blow to the group's morale. Several others die in the next couple of days from exposure and starvation. The group is now in a state of delirium. Their 6-day supply of food is long gone. They have been on the trail for over a week. They are huddled around a fire, their minds reeling from hunger, their bodies giving up. And it is here in this desperate, frozen camp that the most infamous chapter of the Donner Party's story begins. One of the men, a strapping teamster named Patrick Dolan, looks around at the bodies of the dead, and then at the faces of the living, and makes a terrible suggestion. Back at the lake camp, you are blissfully, horribly unaware of the drama unfolding with the forlorn hope. Your world has shrunk to the 4 walls of your smoky cabin. The days are a blur of grey light and long, dark nights. The passage of time is marked only by the entries in Patrick Breen's diary and the relentless, gnawing hunger in your belly. Life has become a series of grim, repetitive tasks. You wake up to the cold. You force down your morning meal a strip of boiled hide, maybe a spoonful of the gritty bone powder paste. The taste is something you'll never forget, a mixture of burnt hair and glue. The main task of the day is gathering firewood. The men, or whoever has the strength, venture out into the blinding white landscape. They have to climb on top of the massive snowdrifts, which are now packed hard enough to walk on, to get to the treetops. They chop off branches and haul them back to the cabins. It's the only thing keeping you from freezing to death. The women's work is inside. They tend the fire, boil the hides, and care for the sick and the children. The cabins are becoming increasingly squalid. They are dark, damp, and filled with smoke. Everyone has a hacking cough from the smoke inhalation. Dysentery is common. The lack of sanitation turns the small spaces into breeding grounds for disease. This is the period where the group's hidden food sources are exhausted. The mainstream narrative focuses on the cattle than the hides. But now, you are truly desperate. You start eating anything at all that might offer a flicker of energy. You dig under the snow near the cabins, hoping to find discarded scraps from the early days when you were less careful with your provisions. You find nothing but frozen dirt. The family pets, the dogs that had been cherished companions, are the next to go. One by one, they are killed and eaten. It's a heartbreaking necessity. These animals were a part of your families, but in the brutal calculus of survival, they are now just a few pounds of precious meat. The meat is stringy and tough, but compared to the hide jelly, it's a feast. Then you turn to even more desperate substitutes. This is a lesser known and truly bizarre part of the story. You start to scavenge for mice. The small field mice that burrow under the snow become a target. The men devise crude traps, and a captured mouse is a major prize. It's roasted whole over the fire, a tiny, crunchy morsel of protein. You also resort to eating twigs and the inner bark of pine trees. You boil them, trying to soften them, but they are mostly indigestible fiber. They fill your stomach but provide almost no nourishment. The act of eating them is more psychological than physiological. It's doing something to fight the hunger, even if that something is useless. Historians who specialize in survival and starvation often point out this phase as the scavenging stage. It's when the human drive to live overrides all sense of normalcy and disgust. The definition of food expands to include anything that can be chewed and swallowed. There is archaeological evidence from the Donner sites that supports this, with analysis of cooking pots showing residues of bone, rodent remains, and various plant fibers not typically consumed by humans. The social fabric within the cabins is now almost completely gone. Families retreat into themselves. You hoard your tiny scraps of hide. You watch your neighbors with suspicion. Did they get a bigger piece than you? Are they hiding a captured mouse? The communal spirit is a distant memory, replaced by a primal, individualistic focus on survival. The deaths begin to accelerate. A child dies. Then an old man. The bodies are taken outside and buried in the snow. It's a simple, emotionless task. You don't have the physical or emotional energy for grief. Each death is a stark reminder of your own precarious position. It also means one less mouth to feed, A thought so monstrous you push it away as soon as it appears. You look at the faces around you. They are no longer the faces of your friends and neighbors. They are skulls with sunken eyes and skin the color of old parchment. You catch your own reflection in a piece of polished metal and you hear a ghost haunting the shell of your former self, waiting for the end. And you have no idea that miles away, in a snow pit on top of the mountain, members of the Forlorn Hope are to make a decision that will forever define your story. While you are boiling mice and pine bark at the lake, the remnants of the Forlorn Hope are huddled in a snow pit high in the mountains, facing a choice that exists at the very edge of human experience. They are in their second week of travel, long past the point of exhaustion and starvation. Several of their number already dead from the elements. They are now dying from hunger one by one. The suggestion, first voiced by Patrick Dolan, hangs in the frigid air. The idea of using the bodies of the dead for food. Survival cannibalism. It's the ultimate taboo, a line that separates humanity from savagery. At first, the idea is rejected with horror. William Eddy, a devoutly religious man, is particularly adamant. They argue, they weep, they weep, they weep, they weep. But, as another day passes and another person dies, the grim logic of the situation becomes undeniable. They are trapped with no other source of food. The bodies of their fallen companions represent their only chance, however slim, of getting out of the mountains alive and sending back help for their families at the lake. If they all die here, then everyone dies. This agonizing decision is the most infamous and sensationalized aspect of the Donner Party story. It's the part that has been the subject of countless books, movies, and morbid jokes. But the reality of the moment was not sensational. It was quiet, grim, and methodical. They make a pact. No one will be killed for food. But if someone dies of natural causes, their body can be used. It's a desperate attempt to create a moral framework for an unthinkable act. Here's a detail that is often glossed over in the more lurid retellings. The first to be consumed were not their friends or family members. It was the bodies of the hired teamsters and, according to some accounts, the Mike Hawk guides, Luis and Salvador, who were the last to die of starvation and exposure in this initial phase. There was a grim, unspoken hierarchy at play. Unspoken hierarchy at play. The bonds of family were held sacred for as long as possible. Unable to watch as the men began the grim task of butchering the bodies. They cut strips of flesh from the corpses, roasted them over the fire and ate. William Foster is the one who reportedly made the first cut. The psychological toll on him, and on all of them, was immense. William Eddy, who had initially refused, eventually succumbed. He later described the experience in his journal, writing that he felt as if he were devouring his own soul. This is where historical accounts begin to get very murky and contentious. The survivors of the Forlorn Hope were, for obvious reasons, reluctant to speak in detail about what happened in the mountains. Their stories were often contradictory and self-serving. For example, the fate of the two Mike Hawk guides, Luis and Salvador, is a subject of intense debate among historians. The official story told by the survivors was that the guides, weakened and delirious, refused the unnatural food, wandered off, and died of starvation. But some scholars, re-examining the evidence, have suggested a more disturbing possibility that the two guides, as outsiders, may have been killed for their flesh when the group became desperate. There is no definitive proof, and it remains one of the darkest and most controversial questions hanging over the entire saga. The grisly food gives them a surge of strength. It's a horrific fuel, but it's fuel nonetheless. They are able to push on. For another 2 weeks, they stumble through the snow-choked wilderness of the Sierra Nevada. They are skeletons dressed in rags, haunted by what they have done. They navigate by instinct, following canyons down the western slope of the mountain. Finally, after 33 days of unimaginable hardship, 7 survivors of the original 17 men and all 5 women stumble out of the snow and into a Mike Hawk village. They are barely human. They are emaciated, frostbitten, and psychologically shattered. William Eddy, the strongest of the group, manages to push on a few more miles to a small settlement, where he collapses and tells his story. The impossible has happened. The Forlorn Hope has made it. They have crossed the mountains. They have survived. But their journey is not over. Now, they have to convince the comfortable, well-fed people of California to mount a rescue for the starving families, your families still trapped on the other side of that terrible wall of snow. The arrival of the 7 survivors of the forlorn hope in the sunny, fertile valleys of California is like a scene from a different planet. They are specters from a world of snow and death, suddenly thrust into a land of plenty. The settlers at the small outpost where they first arrive are horrified by their appearance and their story. William Eddy, though emaciated, becomes the primary advocate for a rescue. He is relentless. He, along with the other survivors, tells the story of the people still trapped at the lake and at Alder Creek. They describe the cabins, the starvation, the children. Their story is so horrific, so beyond the normal experience of the California settlers, that at first some people don't believe it. But the raw, physical evidence of their suffering is undeniable. Their frostbitten limbs, their skeletal frames, their haunted eyes, they are walking proof of the disaster. Word spreads quickly through the small American communities in the region, reaching Sutter's Fort Dieu Babuna, the settlement that would soon become San Francisco. The response from the community is immediate and compassionate. This is a crucial, and often underappreciated, part of the Donner Party story. While the party itself was fracturing under pressure, the settlers in California rallied together. They raised money, gathered food, and organized volunteers for a rescue party. They were driven by a powerful sense of community under duty to their fellow Americans. However, organizing a rescue in the middle of winter is a monumental task. The Sierra Nevada are considered impassable. There is no official government to organize things. California is in a state of flux, in the process of being taken over by the United States from Mexico during the Mexican-American War. The rescue efforts are entirely civilian led. Meanwhile, a familiar face reappears: James Reed. The man banished from the party months earlier had, against all odds, survived his trek through the desert. He made it to California, joined the U.S. military effort there, and had been trying to organize a rescue for his family ever since. He had made one failed attempt already, turned back by the deep snow. Now, hearing the news from the forlorn hope, he redoubles his efforts, partnering with other local men to lead a new relief path. Back at the lake, you know nothing of this. January has been a month of death. The grim routine of starvation continues. Patrick Breen's diary becomes a catalogue of misery. Mrs. Murphy says the children are crying for food continually. Peggy and Edward are sick. Looks gloomy, may God help us. The entries are short, simple, and devastating. The taboo that the forlorn hope had crossed in the mountains is now being confronted at the lake camp. The first recorded instance of survival cannibalism at the lake happens in late January. After a young boy, a son of the Graves family, dies, his mother, who had been part of the forlorn hope and had just been sent back by a rescue party, is faced with a terrible choice. She has other children who are starving. The decision to use the body of her own son for food is a new level of hell. Here's a small, gut-wrenching detail that illustrates the psychological state of the survivors. When the first relief party finally reached the camps, they found evidence that the survivors had begun to refer to the human remains with a euphemism. They called it the precious. It was a way to distance themselves from the horror of what they were doing, to transform the act into something clinical, a matter of survival. Historians and archaeologists are still trying to piece together the exact timeline of when cannibalism became widespread in the camps. The diaries are understandably vague on the subject. Patrick Breen, a devout Catholic, never explicitly mentions it in his diary, though he alludes to it with phrases like "we had a meal of," followed by a blank space. The primary evidence comes from the later accounts of the rescuers and the survivors themselves, as well as archaeological findings. The analysis of cooked bone fragments found at the cabin sites has confirmed that both animal and human remains were processed in the same cooking pots, a silent testament to the ultimate desperation. While the men in California are gathering supplies and mustering their courage to face the mountains, you are huddled in your dark cabin, your world shrinking to the next breath, the next spoonful of boiled hide, the next mournful howl of the wind. You have no idea that help is, finally, on the way. You have given up hope. All you can do is try to survive one more day. On February 18, 1847, After nearly 4 months of being trapped, you hear a sound. It's a shout. A human voice that isn't from your camp. It's faint, distant, carried on the cold, clear air. You stumble out of your cabin, your eyes squinting against the blinding glare of the sun on the snow. You see them, a line of figures, dark against the white, making their way down towards the lake. It's the first relief party. The scene of their arrival is one of the most famous in the story. The rescuers, led by a man named Reyes and Daniel Tucker, are hardened frontiersmen. They are tough, but nothing could have prepared them for what they find. They expect to find a camp of weary, hungry pioneers. Instead, they find a scene from a nightmare. The survivors who emerge from the cabins are not recognizable as people. They are skeletons draped in rags with wild, haunted eyes and skin the color of ash. They are apathetic, moving like ghosts. Some are too weak to even stand. A woman emerges from a hole in the snow, which turns out to be the entrance to a buried cabin. She looks at the rescuers with a blank stare and asks, "Are you men from California, or do you come from heaven?" The rescuers are overwhelmed by the stench of smoke, filth, and death. They see the evidence of what has happened: the boiled hides, the gnawed bones. And in the Murphy cabin, they find the most damning evidence of all: a butchered human body, its organs removed, ready for the pot. The reality of the camp's survival strategy is laid bare. The first task of the rescuers is to distribute food. They have brought beef, bread, and flour, but they have to do it carefully. To a body in the advance of rich food can be fatal. This is a medical fact known as refining syndrome, and it's a phenomenon that historians and doctors have studied in the context of the Donner Party. The rescuers have to give the survivors tiny amounts of food, slowly reintroducing their bodies to nutrition. That first taste of real bread after months of hide jelly is a moment of pure, transcendent joy. It's the taste of life itself. The relief party, known as the first relief, can only take a limited number of survivors out with them. They prioritize the children who are strong enough to walk. 23 people, mostly children, are chosen to make the trek back over the mountains. It's a heartbreaking process of selection. Parents have to watch some of their children leave, while others, too weak to travel, must be left behind with a small cache of food to wait for the next rescue party. You are among those chosen to leave. The journey back over the pass is an ordeal in itself. You are still incredibly weak. The rescuers are strong, but they are not prepared for the difficulty of herding a group of starving, traumatized children through the deep snow. A blizzard hits, and the group is once again trapped, huddled in the snow, their meager food supplies running out. Here, one of the most infamous incidents of the entire saga occurs. The rescuers had left a cache of food on their way in, to be used on the return journey. When they get to the spot, the food is gone. It had been found and devoured by some of the starving survivors from the lake who had disobeyed orders and followed the rescue party. In the ensuing chaos and desperation, 2 of the young children with the party, who were too weak to continue, are left behind in the snow to die. Pragmatic decision that haunts the rescuers for the rest of their lives. This decision is one of the most debated and controversial actions of the rescuers. Were they justified in sacrificing to children to save the larger group, or was it an act of unforgivable cruelty? There is no easy answer. And it highlights the impossible moral calculus of survival that pervaded every aspect of this story. You, however, make it. You stumble on, carried sometimes by the rescuers, driven by the primal instinct to live. Finally, you reach the next way station, a camp set up on the western side of the mountains where food and shelter await. You have crossed the summit. You are safe. But you are one of the lucky ones. Back at the lake, and at Alder Creek, your friends and family members who were too weak to travel are still there, waiting, their small ration of food dwindling, their fate hanging in the balance. The ordeal is over for you, but the story of the Donner Party is not. While you are on your arduous journey to safety with the first relief, life for what passes for it goes on in the death counts at the lake. The arrival of the rescuers got a brief, ecstatic moment of hope, but their departure has left behind a new, more refined kind of despair. The rescuers left a small cache of food for those who remained. But it's not enough. It's a pittance, meant to last until the second relief arrives, but no one knows when that will be. The distribution of this new food creates fresh conflict. The Breen family, being the largest remaining family unit, is accused by the others of taking more than their fair share. The fragile social contract, briefly restored by the arrival of outsiders, shatters once again. Rick Breen's diary captures the mood perfectly. After the elation of being found, his entries sink back into gloom. Peggy very uneasy for fear we shall all perish with hunger. We had but a little meat left the balance of hides. The flicker of hope has made the darkness seem even deeper. The situation is particularly grim in the Murphy cabin, now often referred to by historians as the Cabin of Death. It houses the widowed Lavina Murphy and her children, along with the Kes-Ebug family. Louis Kes-Ebug, already an outcast, becomes the focus of the camp's fear and suspicion. He is accused of stealing food, of hoarding resources. He is a man slowly being stripped of his humanity, both by starvation and by the paranoia of his fellow survivors. It is in this cabin that the full horror of the situation becomes undeniable. With the rescuers' food gone, the survivors revert to the only food source available. The bodies of those who have died are now the primary means of subsistence. They are no longer just surviving, they are living in a charnel house. This is where one of the most poignant and disturbing details of the Donner Party saga is found. The children. The rescuers of the First Relief had prioritized taking children, but many were too weak to go. These children are now wrapped in the cabins, witnesses to the ultimate horror. One of the survivors, Georgia Donner, who was only 4 years old at the time, later recalled seeing her mother and aunts praying that God would send them something to eat. A starving deer supposedly blundered into the camp and was killed, an event Georgia remembered as a miracle. Historians debate the veracity of this miracle deer story. Is it a true memory, or is it a screen memory? A child's way of processing an unspeakable trauma. Did her young mind replace the memory of her family butchering a human corpse with the more palatable image of a deer sent by God? The academic consensus leans towards the latter. It's a heartbreaking example of how the human psyche protects itself from experiences that are terrible to comprehend. Meanwhile, the Second Relief Party is on its way. This one is led by the two men who had been at the center of the story from the beginning: James Reed, the banished leader, and William Eddy, the heroic survivor of the forlorn hope. For Reed, this is a deeply personal mission. He is going back to save his wife and 2 of his children, who were too weak to be evacuated by the First Relief. They fight their way through the melting, treacherous snow, and arrive at the lake camp on March 1st. Reed finds his wife and children alive, though barely. It's a moment of incredible, emotional reunion, the climax of his personal redemption arc. But the joy is short-lived. The state of the camp is far worse than they had imagined. More people have died. The evidence of cannibalism is widespread and sickeningly casual. They find bodies dismembered, skulls split open for their brains. The survivors are in a state of near insanity from hunger and trauma. The Second Relief evacuates another group of survivors, including the rest of the Reed family. But the journey out is just as horrific as the first. A massive storm, one of the worst of the winter, hits them when they are high in the mountains. They are trapped 4 days in what becomes known as the starved camp. They run out of food. The rescued children begin to die. And once again, the survivors are forced to resort to the last taboo to stay alive. This time under the horrified eyes of James Reed himself. The cycle of horror seems endless. The story of the starved camp is a microcosm of the entire Donner Party ordeal, a concentrated dose of horror and impossible choices. The Second Relief, led by James Reed, is caught in a ferocious blizzard high in the mountains. They are trapped for nearly a week in a pit dug in snow with 17 survivors from the lake camp, most of them children. The food runs out almost immediately. The cold is stupefying. The children, already weakened beyond measure, begin to die. First, young Isaac Donner, George Donner's son, dies in Reed's arms. Then 2 of the Graves children perish. The small snow pit becomes a frozen tomb. The rescuers are faced with the same terrible choice as the forlorn hope. They are responsible for the lives of the remaining survivors, but they are all starving to death. After days of agony, they make the decision. They use the bodies of the dead children to feed the living. This moment is particularly devastating for James Reed. He has fought so hard to come back to rescue his family and redeem himself. Now he is forced to preside over a scene of cannibalism, to watch his own rescued children be fed the flesh of their playmates. It's a moral and psychological blow from which he will never fully recover. The historical accounts of Starved Camp are some of the most harrowing of the entire saga. The survivors were in a state of delirium. William Eddy's journal entries from this period are terse and nightmarish. He describes the howling wind, the crying of the starving children, and the grim, silent work of preparing the unnatural food. Here's a dig to the depth of the trauma. When the storm finally broke and the party was able to move on, they had to leave the Breen family behind temporarily, as Mrs. Breen was too weak to travel. Patrick Breen, her husband, refused to leave her side. But before the rescuers left, they reportedly had to forcibly prevent one of the starving men from trying to kill Mrs. Breen for her flesh. The line between survival and murder had become terrifyingly thin. But what about those left behind at the lake after the second relief departed? Only a handful of people remained. At the lake camp, there was the widowed Lavina Murphy, her young son Simon, and the German immigrant Louis Eberg. At the Alder Creek camp, a few miles away, were the leaders of the party, George and Tamsen Donner. George was dying, his arm now horribly infected with gangrene. His wife, Tamsen, refused to leave his side. This is where the story of Tamsen Donner becomes one of legend. She was a school teacher, a woman of refinement and education. She had been given 3 separate opportunities to leave with the rescue parties and save herself. Her children had already been taken to safety, but each time she refused. She would not abandon her dying husband. Her loyalty and devotion have made her one of the most revered figures in the story. The second relief had promised to send back a third relief party for these last few survivors. But the journey of the second relief was so harrowing, so costly, that it took time to organize another party. For weeks, the last survivors at the lake and Alder Creek were utterly alone, surrounded by the dead, their own lives hanging by the most slender of threads. Historians are still fascinated and divided by Tamsen Donner's choice. Was it an act of supreme love and loyalty, or was it a kind of survivor's guilt, an inability to leave the place where she had lost so much? Some have even suggested she was in a state of psychological shock, unable to make a rational decision. Her final letters, which were recovered, show a woman of incredible intelligence and fortitude, lucidly aware of her situation. She spent her final days tending to her husband, a small, solitary beacon of humanity in a world of absolute horror. Back at the lake, Louis Eberg is now alone with Mrs. Murphy and her son. The stories about what happened next are almost entirely from Kes Eberg's own testimony, and they are grim. Mrs. Murphy, who was now blind and delirious from starvation, finally died. Her young son, Simon, died shortly after. Kes Eberg was the last one left to live at the lake camp, a solitary man in a village of the dead. He survived. He later claimed on the remains of those who had perished. He was waiting for a rescue that might never come. By early April 1847, the ordeal is almost over, but the final act is perhaps the most macabre. A fourth relief, often called the salvage party, is organized. Its official purpose is to rescue any remaining survivors. Its unofficial, and perhaps primary, purpose is to recover the property and money of the dead, particularly the rumored wealth of the Donner family. This group is not made up of heroic volunteers like the earlier reliefs. It's a rougher, more opportunistic crew. When they arrive at the Alder Creek camp, they find a scene of utter devastation. The crude shelters are collapsed. The ground, now visible as the snow melts, is littered with human bones and discarded belongings. They find the body of George Donner, who had finally succumbed to his gangrenous infection. He had been carefully laid out and covered with a sheet by his wife Tamsen. But Tamsen Donner is gone. Her body is not there. The salvagers assume she has already set off for the lake camp, trying to make her way out. They find the Donneress money, a significant sum, which they promptly secure. They then proceed to the lake camp. The scene that greets them there is beyond horror. The snow has melted significantly, revealing the full extent of the carnage. The ground around the cabins is a nightmare landscape of dismembered bodies, bones, and filth that had been frozen and hidden all winter. The air is thick with the stench of decay. And in the midst of it all, they find one living person, Louis Eberg. The rescuers' encounter with Eberg is the stuff of gothic horror, and it has forever sealed his reputation as the villain of the Donner Party story. They find him in the Murphy cabin, surrounded by the butchered remains of his fellow campers. He is described as looking like a madman, with wild eyes and a long matted beard. According to their accounts, he has a pot of human flesh boiling on the fire and is wrapped in a quilt that belonged to the Donneress. They immediately accuse him of murdering Tamsen Donner for her flesh and her money. The evidence seems damning. She was last seen heading towards his camp, and now she is gone, and he is the only one left alive. He has the Donner family's money. Eberg vehemently denies it. He claims Tamsen arrived at his cabin exhausted and died of starvation overnight. He admits to eating her remains to survive, but insists he did not kill her. This is one of the greatest and most enduring controversies of the Donner Party saga. Did Louis Eberg murder Tamsen Donner? The members of the Fourth Relief were convinced he did. They reportedly tortured him, threatening him with a noose, until he confessed where the Donner money was hidden. But Eberg himself, for the rest of his long and miserable life, maintained his innocence. He even sued one of his accusers for slander and won a symbolic victory in court, being awarded $1 in damages, though the judge made him pay the court costs. Most modern historians are inclined to believe Eberg. There is no physical evidence that he murdered Tamsen. The members of the Fourth Relief were not reliable witnesses. They had a financial stake in finding the money and portraying Eberg as a villain. It is more likely that Eberg's story is true, that he was simply the last man standing. The unfortunate survivor who was discovered in the midst of the evidence of everyone's collective trauma. The figure onto whom everyone could project the horror and shame of what they had all done to survive. Here's a small, chilling detail that the Fourth Relief reported. As they were exploring the camp, they found the body of one of the Reed children's ponies, which had been buried in the snow all winter. It was perfectly preserved by the cold. They roasted and ate it, declaring it the best beef they had ever tasted. It's a surreal postscript in this landscape of human horror. The discovery of perfectly good animal meat, untouched, feels like the ultimate cosmic irony. The Fourth Relief takes the half-mad, reviled Louis Eberg and leaves the Valley of Death for the last time. They leave behind the silent cabins, the melting snow, and the scattered, unburied bones of the dead. The physical journey of the Donner Party is finally over. But the journey of their story, a story of lies, heroism, and unimaginable choices, is just beginning. Your arrival in the green, sun-drenched landscape of California is a jarring transition. One day, you are in a world of white snow and grey death. The next, you are in a world bursting with color and life. Sutter's Fort, your final destination, feels like a paradise beyond imagining. It's a bustling hub of activity, with adobe walls, thriving gardens, and the sounds of workshops and laughter. The people of California are overwhelmingly kind. They take you in, clothe you, and feed you. The survivors, especially the orphan children, are adopted by local families. For a time, you are a celebrity of sorts, a walking miracle. People want to hear your story. They are fascinated and horrified. But you soon find that telling the story is not a simple thing. How do you explain what happened? How do you describe the taste of boiled hide, the silence of a snow-buried cabin, the impossible choices you were forced to make, or witness the survivors find that their experiences are beyond the comprehension of normal people? A gap opens up between you and the rest of the world. You have seen things that cannot be unseen, done things that cannot be undone. The immediate aftermath is a struggle for normalcy. The children, who make up the majority of the survivors, are remarkably resilient. They learn to play again. They go to school. They grow up, but the trauma remains, buried deep. Many of them, for the rest of their lives, are haunted by nightmares and a deep-seated fear of hunger and cold. This is a key part of the historical aftermath, the long-term psychological toll on the survivors. They suffered from what we would now call post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Their lives were forever shaped by those few months in the mountains. The adults have a harder time. Many of them are broken by the experience. Louis Geseberg, the ultimate survivor and villain of the story, lives a life of misery. He is shunned and reviled. People point at him in the street. Children throw rocks at his house. He is a living ghost forever trapped by his reputation. He tries to run businesses, but they always fail because no one will deal with him. He is the man who ate Tom's end honor, and that is all he will ever be. The Reed family, by contrast, becomes a model of successful recovery. James Reed, despite his early mistakes, emerges as a hero and a respected citizen of the New California. He becomes a successful businessman in San Jose, whose daughter, Virginia Reed, whose pony was the first casualty of the shortcut, grows up to be a poised and articulate young woman. Her letters describing the ordeal are some of the most important historical documents of the event. But even for the Reeds, the past is always present. Here's a little-known and poignant detail for the rest of her life. Virginia Reed could not bear to see food wasted. If a guest at her dinner table left food on their plate, she would gently admonish them, telling them they didn't know what it was like to be truly hungry. The trauma was integrated into her daily life, a constant, quiet reminder. Historians are still debating how the survivors coped and how their stories were shaped in the telling. In the years that followed, several accounts were published. Some, like the one by Patrick Breen, were based on diaries kept during the ordeal. Others were sensationalized newspaper articles that focused on the most lurid details, particularly the cannibalism. The survivors themselves often gave conflicting accounts, either to protect their own reputations or because their memories were fragmented by trauma. The story of the Donner Party quickly becomes part of American folklore, a cautionary tale about hubris and the dangers of the West. But in the process, the complex, human story is often flattened. The survivors are turned into one-dimensional characters, heroes, villains, victims. Tam's end honor becomes a saint. Louis Geseberg a monster. The messy grey reality of what happened, that everyone was a victim, and almost everyone was a victim, and almost all to make terrible choices gets lost. You, as a survivor, have to live with this. You have to carry the weight of your memories, and you have to navigate a world that wants to turn your unimaginable suffering into a simple, digestible story. You have survived the snows of the Sierra, but you now have to survive the rest of your life. You are in California now, safe. The sun is warm on your skin, and there is food on your plate. But your mind is still back in the mountains in the snow. You are haunted by the faces of those you left behind. Every time a new party of rescuers returns from the mountains, you seek them out. Your heart pounding, desperate for news. The stories they tell, pieced together in hushed tones around the fire at Sutter's Fort, paint a picture of what happened after you left, and it is the stories about the children that are the most difficult to hear. The men of the final relief parties, hardened men who thought they had seen everything, are shaken to their core by what they found. They described the scene at the Alder Creek camp, where the Donner families were trapped. It's here that they find one of the most quietly heartbreaking details of the entire ordeal. The rescuers noticed something strange about the children they found alive. Their mouths were stained, and their teeth were worn down in an unusual way. They soon discovered why. The children had been systematically chewing on anything and everything to trick their stomachs and stave off the excruciating pangs of hunger. They gnawed on pine cones and chewed the bark from twigs. But their domain, so others were far more desperate. The first was leather. They would take scraps of leather from shoes, from belts, from the discarded hides and just chew on them for hours. It provided no nutrition, but the act of chewing and the feeling of having something in their mouths was a psychological comfort. It was a way to fool the body into thinking it was being fed. The second, and more shocking, was tobacco. The party had carried a supply of chewing tobacco with them. In the final desperate weeks, the starving adults gave it to the children. They discovered that chewing tobacco acted as a powerful appetite suppressant. The nicotine would curb the hunger pangs for a while, providing a small respite from the constant, gnawing agony. So the rescuers found these small, skeletal children, some as young as 5 or 6, with wads of chewing tobacco in their cheeks. their infant mouths stained brown. It's an image of innocence corrupted, of a childhood so completely warped by desperation that a toxic substance becomes a form of medicine. This detail of children chewing tobacco is a historical fact corroborated by multiple rescue accounts. It's often overlooked in the grand drama of the cannibalism, but in many ways, it's just as disturbing. It speaks to a level of suffering that is almost impossible to imagine. Parents watching their children cry from hunger, making the calculated decision to give them poison to quiet their pain. Historians who focus on the domestic and social aspects of the pioneer experience often point to these small details as being more revealing than the sensational ones. The story of the Donner Party isn't just about the dramatic taboo of cannibalism, it's about the quiet, daily erosion of normalcy. It's about a world turned so upside down that giving tobacco to a toddler becomes an act of love. The academic debate around the children's experience is complex. For a long time, their testimonies were considered unreliable, tainted by the trauma and the passage of time. But in recent decades, historians have begun to look at them more closely, not as perfect factual records, but as invaluable windows into the psychological reality of the event. The miracle deer story, for example, is seen less as a historical falsehood and more as a profound psychological truth about how a child's mind copes with the unbearable. Scholars are still trying to unravel which parts of the children's stories are literal memories and which are metaphors created to make sense of the senses. As you sit in the California sun, you listen to these stories and you try to reconcile the children you knew, the ones who played tag on the plains and laughed around the campfire with the haunted, tobacco-chewing ghosts described by the rescuers. You realize that survival was not a single event, but a long, drawn-out process of losing yourself piece by piece. For the children, part of what they lost was their own childhood, sacrificed one scrap of leather, one wad of tobacco at a time. The physical scars of the survivors would eventually heal, but these psychological wounds, inflicted in the dark, smoky cabins, would last a lifetime. The years pass. You watch California transform, the trickle of pioneers turning into a flood with the gold rush of 49th. Towns spring up overnight. The wild land you struggled through is tamed, mapped, and fenced. And your story, the story of the Donner Party, grows into a legend. But it is not your story. Not really. It's a story told in dime novels and sensationalist newspaper articles back east. A story of monsters and ghouls in the mountains. The mainstream narrative thus solidifies as one of simple horror. It's a ghost story told around campfires, a cautionary tale for children. In this version of the story, you and your fellow survivors are flattened into archetypes. Tamzend Honor is the beautiful, tragic heroine. James Reed is the flawed but ultimately redeemed hero. The child-eating monster in the snow, the cannibalism which for you was a final, desperate, soul-crushing act of survival, becomes the central, lurid spectacle. Your immense suffering is reduced to a single, shocking word. You live with this distorted echo of your past. You watch your children grow up knowing they carry a name that is synonymous with horror. You try to live a normal life, but you are always a Donner Party survivor. And then, more than a century after you have passed on, something remarkable happens. The story, which seemed set in stone, begins to change. Archaeologists, armed with new technology and a more nuanced understanding of the past, return to your old prison. They go to the lake, to the site of the Murphy cabin. They go to Alder Creek, to the spot where George and Tamzend Honor spent their final days. They are looking for the truth, buried under a century of soil and myth. And here they find one of the most surprising and little-known facts of your story. They expect to find a boneyard. Given the lurid tales of rampant, frenzied cannibalism, they expect to find piles of human bones, butchered and cracked open for their marrow, just like the animal bones. They find the animal bones, thousands of them, ox, horse, deer, even rodent, all showing the telltale signs of being cooked and eaten. But they find remarkably few human bones, and the ones they do find rarely show the same marks of butchery. They aren't split open for marrow. They aren't charred from being roasted over a fire. This lack of archaeological evidence for the most extreme forms of cannibalism has become a major point of debate among modern historians and archaeologists. What does it mean? The evidence suggests that while cannibalism undoubtedly occurred, the diaries and survivor testimonies are clear on that. It was not the frenzied, monstrous free for all of popular legend. It seems that even in the depths of starvation, you and your fellow survivors retained a shred of your humanity. You treated the remains of your dead differently from the remains of animals. You did what you had to do to survive, but you did not descend into complete savagery. The archaeological record suggests a quiet, grim, and reluctant necessity, not a cannibal feast. It suggests that you held onto a taboo, a final line, even as you were forced to cross it. This scientific discovery begins to slowly chip away at the old, monstrous legend. It rehumanizes you. It shows that the truth was quieter, sadder, and infinitely more complex than the ghost story. You weren't monsters. You were just people. People who made a wrong turn, who were the victims of bad advice and bad luck, and who were pushed to the absolute limit of human endurance. You, of course, knew that all along. You knew that the real story wasn't in the shocking details, but in the quiet moment in Tam's and Honor's loyalty, in Charles Stanton's honor, in the way a mother brushed her starving child's hair, in the desperate attempt to carve a pretty shape into a piece of wood while the world fell apart. The real story was about the struggle to remain human in the face of the inhuman. And now, finally, the rest of the world is beginning to understand. The story is over now. The last voice from the past has faded, and the silence that remains is a gentle one. The journey is done. The wagon has stopped rolling, its heavy wheels finally still. The great, empty plains and the cold, terrifying mountains have all dissolved into the soft darkness of your room. The only things left are the quiet hum of the fan, the weight of the blanket on your shoulders, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. You can feel the last echoes of the tale drifting away, like smoke from a dying campfire. The faces of the dawn arrest in the reeds of Kes Ebergen Stanton. They are all receding, becoming part of that distant, dreamlike place we call history. Their struggle is over. Their long winter has ended, and now yours has too. There are no more hard decisions to be made, no more mountains to cross. There is only this stillness, this quiet. The air is calm. Your mind is letting go. Let the current of sleep pull you gently away from the shore of wake of snows. Let it carry you into a place of deep and dreamless rest. Everything is peaceful now. The end of the article. Good night.